great martyr Anastasia, the deliverer from poisons, her teacher, Martyr Chrysogonus, and many with them, commemorated on December 22nd. The great martyr Anastasia, the deliverer from poisons, was a Roman by birth, who suffered for Christ during Diocletian's persecution of Christians, circa 304. Her father was a pagan, and her mother Fausta was a secret Christian. As a child, Anastasia's teacher was an educated and pious Christian named Chrysogonos. After the death of her mother, Anastasia's father gave her in marriage to a pagan named Publius, but by feigning illness, she preserved her virginity. Clothing herself in the garb of a beggar and accompanied by only one servant, she visited the prisons. She fed, treated, and often ransomed captives who were suffering for their faith in Christ. When her servant told Publius about this, he beat his wife and confined her in his house. Then Anastasia began to correspond secretly with Chrysogonus, who told the saint to be patient, to cleave to the cross of Christ, and to accept the Lord's will. He also foretold the impending death of Publius in the ocean. Publius did drown as he was setting out for Persia with a delegation. After her husband's death, Anastasia distributed her property to the poor and suffering. Diocletian was informed that the Christians who filled the prisons of Rome stoically endured their torments. He commanded that all of them should be put to death in a single night, and that Chrysogonus be sent to him at Aquileia. Anastasia followed her teacher at a distance. The emperor interrogated Chrysogonus personally, but could not make him deny Christ. Therefore he commanded that he be decapitated and thrown into the sea. The holy martyr's body and severed head were carried to shore by the waves. There, by divine providence, the relics were found by a priest named Zoilus, who placed them in a coffer and concealed them in his home. St Chrysogonos appeared to Zoilus and informed him that 3 sisters who lived nearby, Agape, Chionia, and Irene, April 16th, would soon suffer martyrdom for Christ. He told him to send St Anastasia to them to encourage them. St Chrysogonus foretold that Zoilus would also die on the same day. 9 days later, the words of St Chrysogonus were fulfilled. Zoilus fell asleep in the Lord, and St Anastasia visited the 3 maidens before their tortures. After these 3 martyrs surrendered their souls to God, she buried them. After carrying out her teacher's request, the saint went from city to city, ministering to Christian prisoners. Proficient in the medical arts of the time, she zealously cared for captives far and wide, healing their wounds and relieving their suffering. Because of her labors, St. Anastasia was known as the deliverer from potions, Pharmakolytria, since by her intercessions she has healed many from the effects of potions, poisons, and other harmful substances. She made the acquaintance of the pious young widow named Theodote, finding in her a faithful helper. When it was learned that she was a Christian, Theodote was brought in for questioning. Meanwhile, St. Anastasia was arrested in Illyricum. This occurred just after all the Christian captives there had been murdered in a single night by Diocletian's order. St. Anastasia went to one of the prisons, and finding no one there, she began to weep loudly. The jailers realized that she was a Christian and took her to the prefect of that district, who tried to persuade her to deny Christ by threatening her with torture. After his unsuccessful attempts to persuade Anastasia to offer sacrifice to idols, he handed her over to the pagan priest Ulpian in Rome. The cunning pagan told St. Anastasia to choose between luxury and riches or grievous sufferings. He set before her gold, precious stones, and fine clothing, as well as fearsome instruments of torture. The crafty man was put to shame by the bride of Christ. St. Anastasia refused the riches and chose the tools of torture, but the Lord prolonged the earthly life of the saint, and Ulpian gave her 3 days to reconsider. Charmed by Anastasia's beauty, the pagan priest decided to defile her. However, when he tried to touch her, he suddenly became blind. His head began to ache so severely that he screamed like a madman. He asked to be taken to a pagan temple to pray to the idols for help, but on the way, he fell down and died. St. Anastasia was set free, and she and Theodote devoted themselves once more to the care of imprisoned Christians. Before long, St. Theodote and her 3 sons received the crown of martyrdom. Her eldest son, Euodostu, stood bravely before the judge and endured his beatings without protest. After much torture, they were all thrown into a red-hot oven. St. Anastasia was caught again and condemned to death by starvation. She remained in prison without food for 60 days. St. Theodote appeared to the martyr every night and gave her courage. Seeing that hunger caused St. Anastasia no harm whatsoever, the judge sentenced her to drowning together with other prisoners. Among them was Eutychianos, who was condemned for his Christian faith. The prisoners were put into a boat which went out into the open sea. The soldiers bored holes in the boat and got into a galley. St Theodote appeared to the captives and steered the ship to shore. When they reached dry land, 120 men believed in Christ and were baptized by Saints Anastasia and Eutychianos. All were captured and received a martyr's crown. St. Anastasia was stretched between 4 pillars and burned alive. A certain pious woman named Apollinaria buried her body, which was unharmed by the fire, in the garden outside her house. In the 5th century, St. Anastasia's relics were transferred to Constantinople, where a church was built and dedicated to her. Later, her head and one of her hands were transferred to the monastery of St. Anastasia near Mount Athos.
Ave Maria Stella